All right, so a couple of weeks ago here, I did a little bit of a class on Charlemagne, or actually it was, what happened was I wanted to do a class on Charlemagne, and what happened was I ended up looking at all the things that happened leading up to him, which were completely fascinating because Europe had undergone a mini dark age where the population had collapsed and where you had scenes that looked like the pictures I showed of Detroit last week, where what had been cities were now totally overgrown with weeds and depopulated. And you had a movement coming out of Ireland, which had actually started in Italy with St. Augustine, but at any rate, to go back in and civilize Europe. And what occurred under Charlemagne was, and what you see with all these people, it's not a happy coincidence or just some kind of piece of trivia that Ben Franklin was a scientist who did breakthrough work in electricity. That any leader who's ever thought of statecraft or who's thought of governing people for the good of mankind has always been obsessed with scientific progress and with education. And that's what occurred under Charlemagne, which was a massive work in education, in literacy, canal building, etc., etc. We can go because I want to. And what I had talked about before is that he, and also not coincidentally, had built up an extraordinary friendship with Harun al-Rashid, who was at the same time, and they never met. He was in Baghdad, and their collaboration was actually facilitated by a third Renaissance, what's next, occurring here in Khazaria, which was a Jewish Renaissance. And if you read the writings of the greatest thinkers of all of these areas, there is a remarkable unity of conception of what is man's relationship to God, what is man's relationship to God and the universe, and a massive commitment to scientific progress. This is all around 800 AD. It's quite remarkable. And one of the things that occurs is that Charlemagne wants an elephant for his birthday, and Harun al-Rashid has an elephant, a white elephant. You've heard this thing about the white elephant? Harun al-Rashid has the white elephant delivered to Charlemagne in Europe. And then Charlemagne gives Harun al-Rashid a pack of his best hunting dogs. And all of these things are the Jews of this region are the ambassadors going back and forth between the Christian leadership and the Muslim leadership. And then what happens is Charlemagne says, well, we really would like the Holy Land, which is nowhere near where he's going to be able to access it. And Harun al-Rashid says, okay. He says, but since you can't get here very easily, I'll commit myself to defending. I'll protect it and defend it, but we know that it belongs to you. I mean, it was just an absolutely remarkable friendship and collaboration. Keep going. This is the Islamic area, Abbasid Caliphate. It says 786 to 809. It's a rather large area. And this area is very important in here for what I'm about to go through. Okay. This is paper. One of the things that the Islamic Renaissance contributed to civilization was taking the invention of paper from the Chinese and bringing it west and producing paper, which greatly enhanced. All of them were massive. Charlemagne, everybody in this time who was not part of empire, because you have the remnants of the Roman Empire in the south and in Italy and somewhat in Turkey. And they were fighting to get back empire. So the people who were not going to fall for empire were massively committed to public education. So paper and literacy was a major breakthrough. It was a very important development. Now this is part of what they were doing. Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Also to uplift people was the architecture. And I was really struck because it turns out that the great mosque at Cordoba, which is in southern Spain, Andalusia, was built exactly at the same time. The cathedral at Aachen of Charlemagne took longer to build, but they were both initiated the same year. And what's absolutely stunning is the similarity of the architecture. This is the mosque. This is the mosque. There's the cathedral on the outside. That's the cathedral. Look at those arches with the stripes. Isn't that something? This is the cathedral. And then look at this. Okay, so this is the Charlemagne, the Christian Renaissance. This is the Islamic Renaissance. Isn't that striking? I mean, and these things were massive, massive structures that were huge engineering challenges. Clearly there was a sense of aesthetic, of proportion, of beauty that went into both of them. And as I said, they were done exactly at the same time. Now, here's Ibn Sina, and he is really important because when Harun al-Rashid died in 814. Ibn Sina was born in 980, and he died in 1037. And during his lifetime, there was a total war with the Turks trying to take over that whole region, which is now the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, that whole area, Persia, Iran. What they wanted to do was to reestablish empire. And there was war after war and bloody battles, and Ibn Sina spent like half of his life either in battle or fleeing or in hiding. And he actually, go to the next, wrote his great book of medicine. He was a very famous doctor. In fact, one of the ways he ended up becoming so learned was that, and given a position of prominence, was that one of the leaders, I forget who it was, but anyway, was really sick. And Ibn Sina was 17 years old. And the guy was deathly ill. None of the doctors had been able to cure him. And they said, well, let's get this kid. He's always in the library. He's a real bookworm. Why don't we bring him in? And so he went in to start to do work. And the ruler gave him permission to then go through all of the libraries in the palace. And he did cure the guy. He cured him, but he also described every room in the palace had documentation on different areas of philosophy. So one was languages, one was biology, one was physics, one was philosophy, and he would go through and study everything. And he said that by the time he was 18 years old, he had completed his studies. He was the real genius. And then what happened was there were these wars, and he was, like riding around on camelback and fighting battles, and in the middle of fighting these battles, he was writing this enormous book on medicine in the middle of a war. And there's a funny story. You can go to the next picture. Some of his writings. There's a funny story about just because he had a really funny sense of humor, and he was sitting in court with one of the rulers, and this guy, the court philologist, came in, and they were having a dispute about language. And Ibn Sina answered the question, and the philologist got really offended and said, "How can you answer the question? You haven't even studied philology. Obviously, we have to disregard your answer." So what happened was Ibn Sina then took 3 years and studied everything there was, and he wrote 2 books in the style of some ancient script, and he brought them to the philologist, and he said, I found, and he got the leather or whatever, was all really worn down, so they looked really old, and he brought them to the philologist and said, "Now I want you to tell me what's the origin of this language." And the guy said, "Well, I recognize some of this, but I don't know the phrases." So Ibn Sina said, "Why don't you go to the such and such book on, blah, blah, blah." And then the guy realized that he had been totally set up and that Ibn Sina had gone and done all this. So he was like that. There was another incident where someone in the Turkish Empire, because it was a total war all the time, so they sent someone to him with a page of everything that was wrong with his great book of medicine. So he invites the messengers in, and he was famous for being able to drink like crazy while everyone else would be falling on the floor. So he calls his assistant to give him 5 sheets of paper, however these scroll things are, so 5 times more than what's brought to him. So he sits there drinking with the 2 messengers. They finally fall asleep. He stays up all night, and in the morning he says, I want you to take my response, and he's written out 5 times as much in the response, answering all the disagreements while everyone else dropped down dead drunk. And he did this as a way of really rubbing in his power of concentration. So finally, in one of these battles, he was sick. He got sick with colic, and since he was in the middle of a war, he didn't want to give himself a normal course of treatment, so he prescribed something which was quite radical, which ended up killing him, ultimately. That's how he ended up dying. But what happened is this guy, Al-Ghazali, came in after, a little bit after the death of Ibn Sina, who died in 1037, late 1000, 1100. And what he did is, the idea was for the oligarchical thought to take over again. So what he did was he wrote something called The Destruction of Philosophy. Because Ibn Sina's point, like Kepler, like any great philosopher, is that when they begin to work on discovering the ordering of the universe, what happens is they become more and more convinced that there has to be a creator. That is, that science is not contradictory to religion. That the more work you do, the more, in a sense, the creation of the universe seems miraculous. So what Ibn Sina was doing, and Al-Farabi, is that they were infusing Islam with their work on science, on medicine, on culture, philosophy. And Al-Ghazali destroyed the religion. That was what he did. He wrote The Destruction of Philosophy. And what he said is that you cannot, it's a slippery slope, that you cannot have philosophy and religion. That if you're going to be religious, it's just religion, and you cannot know anything through philosophy or science. And he had all of the works of Ibn Sina burned and destroyed. Yeah, so when you think of where does the radical Islam come from, you can thank this guy. And the British promote him like crazy. It's the 9th century anniversary. I guess, yeah, he died in 1111, so it's 900 years after his death. And if you go online and you look up Al-Ghazali, they tell you he was a brilliant scholar and he founded universities and blah. I mean, they're doing a big promotional of him, who really played a major, major role in destroying civilization. So that was actually what I've learned, is that that was the original destruction. The destruction of the destruction was not from Ibn Sina, it was Averroes, who specifically wrote a treatise called The Destruction of the... He was Muslim in Andalusia. And then finally, there was someone named Hoxha, which was out of his tradition, who wrote a treatise called The Destruction of the Destruction of the Destruction. And that was the end. That was the end of the Islamic Renaissance. And then you had the Inquisition taking over in Spain, and the Moors and the Jews were all expelled. And, you know, people had to come over here.